Recently, and by recently I meant last week, GR Toys gave us two wonderful Nasutoceratopses, which heralded their comeback after Therizinosaurus and Tyrannosaurus, with the promise of previous standards of detail and paint application. This week, however, they announced yet another dinosaur I'd hoped we'd see from PNSO, Ouranosaurus. Ouranosaurus is one of those dinosaurs that would have been relegated to the status of bantha fodder, destined to be one of those background NPCs for more glamorous dinosaurs, or a red shirt about to meet a very premature end, if it were not for an unusual feature or two. An example is Shunosaurus, looking like a generic sauropod except for a tail club. And here, we have a hadrosauriform that would have barely elicited a yawn, except for this sail, or as some suggest, a hump. Ouranosaurus means brave or courageous lizard, from Niger, from the Greek savros, meaning lizard, and the specific name nigeriensis, meaning from Niger. The Urano, as far as I've been able to find out, derives from an Arabic name meaning courage or bravery. I couldn't find a definitive root for this, so if anyone knows, I'd love to hear a more precise etymology. Ouranosaurus has been estimated to be between 7 to 8.3 meters, or 23 to 27 feet long. These models each measure 23 centimeters, or 9 inches along this curve, putting them into 1 to 35 scale. For reference, here's how a human would look like. So certainly a rather medium-sized hadrosauriform. Once again, there are two color variants, the orange and the green. Now pleasingly, the in-hand paint tab is close to the paint master in the release images, just as it was with Nasutoceratops. Great start. Let's look at the orange first. Starting at the head, you immediately see the striking color accent here that begins postnasally and continues down dorsally. I just really like this fade here going into the rest of the orange. The head of Ouranosaurus is rather distinct, with a low profile and the most elongate of any hadrosauroid. However, the retroorbital and the upper temporal bar area looks too short and seems insufficient to accommodate the infratemporal fenestra and the quadrate. Let me know what you think. The proximal ends of the nasal bones are rounded, creating rugose protuberances, and here you see the keratin overstructures. It's nice when little details like these are present. The eyes are very nicely painted, and I like the dark color accent around them. I was always a sucker for eyeshadow. The beak has another color accent. It's really outstanding how an ordinary looking head can look like with the right kind of paint application. A look at the underside of the mandible and the throat area. I'm just really liking these skin folds. Now moving down postcranially, our eyes are led immediately to these tall neural spines. We're fortunate to have well-preserved remains, albeit with some restoration and speculative repair, so exact dimensions are unknown. But the longest ones are over the forelimbs here. The spines over the sacrum are shorter, then lengthen again in the tail base, before finally decreasing towards the tip. Effectively, you have a sinusoidal form, and it's really nice how GR Toys has captured this instead of giving it a haphazard generic sail. As a key point of interest, we expect some accenting, and indeed here we see that into the brown is a very nice deep blue that draws the eye to the top margin and then fades into the rest of the animal. It's painted such, however, that the sail itself isn't very differentiated from the torso, and thus giving an appearance more like a hump than a sail. Indeed, this is a possible interpretation because of the structure of the neural spines themselves. It's actually a look I welcome. Were its sole use as a visual attractor, it would make more sense to have more of it highlighted. And choosing this mix suggests more possibilities, including a function of simply making the animal look bigger. Now, I've talked about sails, humps, and their proposed functions in my PNSO Acrocanthosaurus review, so please go check it out. And down the torso, you can observe both the sculpted detail, including a scattering of larger scutes, and also the fade of the various colours. We also have these patterns which are so gently applied, and just like the Nasutoceratops, with no hard edges, and so very naturalistic. There are skin folds and tension lines, and here I have a couple of points. First of all, I do think that these could be a bit smaller, with these intermediate rows looking too big. And second, if you consider the curvature seen dorsally and the corresponding convexity on the left, you'd expect more folds on the right and tension lines on the left. But you'll see in the left flank and tail that it has the same, if not more, of these folds. Otherwise, the overall detail in these finer scales are good. There are also some larger crack-like rifts, which seem to be a deliberate addition, and that gives it a rough and rather craggy appearance that's a bit more obvious under certain lighting conditions, and some of you might not like this. Now, continuing down the tail, you see how the uniform colour makes it hard to differentiate any separate sail. And to put a nice feather in the cap, we have the tip that recalls again the colour accent in the hump or sail and the top of the head. In all, I'd say that these stark blue accents on a warmer colour gives me a louder impression for this colour variant. The positioning of the distal end of the ischium seems a little too superior-posterior to me. But it also looks like this might be partly due to a slight declination of the vertebral column compared to the more horizontal ones often seen in reconstructions. And going down, we see the kind of robust hind limbs we'd expect to see in Ouranosaurus, with the femur longer than the tibia. The tibia perhaps could be just a tiny bit longer, and the femur a little shorter, but really these would be nitpicks and maybe not even accurate ones. The pest has the correct number of toes, and the kind of thick claws you'd expect to see in a weight-bearing foot. Now down to the hand, however, is where there's an unfortunate misstep. GR Toys Haolonggood has chosen to restore the hands with the kind of manus seen. It looks, well, roughly hadrosaurid, I'd say. However, there's good evidence for a thumb spike in Ouranosaurus. Indeed, it's one reason why it used to be placed in Iguanodontidae together with Iguanodon. There is a thumb claw, but it's weight-bearing. A kind of weird configuration. So it's unfortunate that we could have had a near-perfect Ouranosaurus but for this one thing. And I'll leave the modelling of these two tiny extremities to the experts. And finally, just the pose of it. Now, GR Toys has chosen a quadrupedal pose, which is possible in Ouranosaurus, though some have argued only facultatively. It's almost in a slow, graceful walk. And if you've seen some of my other videos, you'll know that the dignified poise, especially in a ponderous herbivore, is a juxtaposition I very much like. Now let's have a look at the other one, the green. And here, a different color scheme gives you a different feel. And while the brown gives me a louder impression, this green is very soothing. Of course, the overall is green, but with very pleasant fades from dark to light in different places. And also some accents of orange along here. And in the tail. The pattern is white, which does create a sharper contrast than the stripes in the orange. There are still accents in the head area, but this time more distally, with nothing on top. Now you may know I love the banded look, especially on tails, and here we see that in the tip, which style differs from the highlight in the orange. Now a once over of the green. And you can see that in terms of sculpted detail, it's the same. But somehow this coloration makes the detail actually easier to see in a few places than the orange. Now a more direct comparison between the two, in case you need some input to make up your mind. As we mentioned briefly, this Ouranosaurus doesn't have the hands we'd expect, so I thought it'd be interesting to take a quick look at hands. Now, my very first serious dinosaur book was this illustrated Encyclopedia of Dinosaurs by David Norman. Dr. Norman, of course, is an authority on Iguanodon and Iguanodontids, although more people may know his name from the controversial paper suggesting a revamp of dinosaur classification. Anyway, this book gave me an introduction to many groups, and even previously unsexy dinosaurs were made cool. And one of the coolest aspects of Iguanodon I'll always remember is its Swiss Army hands. You have the thumb spike for defense, hoof digits for weight bearing, and a prehensile fifth digit for manipulation. I also learned that Iguanodon was just one of a family of similar creatures, including Ouranosaurus. Indeed, Ouranosaurus too has that thumb spike, which was one of the diagnostic features of this group at the time, albeit smaller than Iguanodon. Nowadays, Iguanodontidae is regarded as a paraphyletic group, and it's largely considered to be invalid, or at least under contestation. For a quick intro to what this means, have a read of Dr. Hohn's article at the Archosaur Musings blog, which I'll link to below. A few analyses place Ouranosaurus in hadrosauriformes if you've seen this cladogram based on McDonald 2010, or here, according to Norman 2015. In either case, it occupies a rather basal position, and since these basal forms are believed to have been still facultatively quadrupedal, they were more likely to have better differentiated fingers. Specific to Ouranosaurus itself, here's a look at a Venice specimen described in the Bertozzo 2017 paper. I should note that much of the left hand were reconstructed by taking reflections of the right, with the all-important digit 1 being a plaster copy of the one in the paratype. But overall, you see that digits 2 and 3 were hoof-like, presumably taking the brunt of weight bearing during quadrupedal movement. And of course, this inconvenient spike here. So its absence in the GR Toys version does stick out like a sore thumb. Now speaking of the Bertozzo paper, if you watch my PNSO Parasaurolophus, you know I was full of praise for how well written his 2021 paper was, and how easy it was to read, and a very good paper for those starting to read more serious literature. And here I want to shout out his Ouranosaurus paper. If you've read the various textbooks out there, such as this one, you'll know that by the fast-moving nature of the science, books like these are a very good gateway, but don't capture the most up-to-date information by the time they're published. And even more sadly for me, they don't tell you a lot about anatomy. And that's where articles come in. Good articles. For example, I learned more about ankylosaurian terminology from Arbor's 2017 paper, and sculpts and scales from Blow's 2001 paper. Unfortunately for me, it's been random as to what gems I come across. This Ourano paper is one such. Particularly, I refer to a dressing of the original diagnosis of Ouranosaurus in the Takei 1976 paper, where he either refutes or supports each statement point by point. For example, descriptors like very long skull, narrow and relatively low need to be qualified with actual measurement ratios. He also compares it to other hadrosaurids to save you the trouble. And what does medium-sized actually mean? What's the cutoff for it? In this case, if we follow the boundary of 8 meters in length, how does the holotype compare? And what are some of the caveats to consider? And is it an epimorphic qualifier at all, considering other relatives? And a final example here, extremely long neural spines of the dorsal vertebrae. And again, how long is extremely long? He then goes on to improve on how this should be written. And the list goes on, and makes for really pleasurable and educational reading. In so doing, you learn a lot about other hadrosaurs too. And finally, let me just say thank you for actually naming the reference articles instead of those damn superscript numbers that has me flipping back and forth to identify the paper. It's nice when reader ergonomics are considered. Alright, let's get to some comparisons. Of course, we have to look at some hadrosaurs. And in honor of Dr. Bertozzo, let's bring out the other hadrosaur he wrote such a delightful paper on, Parasaurolophus. And here you can see some similarities, almost in the coloration accents of the snout. And also you'll see the current level of fine texturing introduced by this very model by PNSO. Let's bring out the PNSO iguanodon, since it was once thought to be in the same group. Maybe some other hadrosaurids. And for an idea of size, for many of you who have this, the wild safari and Montosaurus. And finally, just for fun, let's bring out the wild safari Nigersaurus, Sarcosuchus, and the PNSO Suchomimus to have a nice little LRAS formation display going. So that's it for this review. Now I'm glad to have this, even though the hands are a little disappointing. It is a pity that these little anatomical oversights detract from what could have been a definitive model. But for this Ouranosaurus and the recent Nasutoceratopses, just on the sculpt, the paint, and the price point, it's already a winner for many of us. you just wouldn't expect something like this to be offered at a US price bracket of $19 to $22, and we can be grateful for that. If they apply the same rigor to their research that PNSO does, I think they could give PNSO a run for the money. And like the Nasutoceratops in gross terms, GR Toys has captured much of the anatomy of these dinosaurs, and unless you're highly demanding in terms of known anatomy, these little inaccuracies will amount to little more than minutiae, and you'll be very happy with these. As always, I look forward to your comments, and I'll see you in the next video.